everybody. All right, today I'm really excited. We got Dr. J here. Excuse me, for those that don't know, Dr. Leonard Jeffries. He will be joining me shortly. But before I bring him in, I want to remind everybody that our premiere is next Saturday. Okay, next Saturday, July 18th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Get your tickets. It is going to be wonderful. Sit down with your families and check out this documentary. Go to hoppyfilm.com and check out Hoppy, the role of economics in the development of civilization. All right, so this is really a pleasure and a treat to bring out Dr. Leonard Jeffries because he is very crucial and instrumental to bringing Hoppy to everybody. So without further ado, I'm gonna bring in Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Hey, Dr. J, how you doing?
Well, Hotep family. I'm hopeful that we're all moving in the right direction in terms of African victory. So every time I get a chance to share a word or two, I'm delighted to do it. So when we had our lovely associate come and said that she's going to set us up, our hearts were pounding with joy, and there she done did it. So Africans are on the march, but we have to understand the foundation from which we've sprang, and we have to have objectives that are real, so that you have to have a foundation that you can build on. You have to understand the struggle continues, but you have to have a plan. And one of our great brothers, a real warrior, and the generation behind me, Dr. Amos Wilson, he, like others, represents not just a important historical figure, or not just a monumental work in terms of their publication, or a sacrifice they made in giving their life to the struggle. But we need to see these brothers and sisters as schools of knowledge. And so as you begin to expand your mind and deaden that European mind that's been plugged into us and pounded into us, and as we begin to Africanize our lives, we've got to have the knowledge. And so it's interesting to say that you had a chance to meet Dr. J, Dr. Leonard Jeffries Jr., his African stool name, because he's been made a chief and a leader in several African communities on the continent. So my stool name is Nana Kwekujua Ajiman II of the Agogo stool in Asante, Ghana. But our African heritage is such an important foundation that we have to have serious work on our peoples. Right now, we're in the streets saying Black Lives Matter, and we're demonstrating and articulating and raising hell. But if we do not Africanize those Black lives, we won't have the strength, the power, and the vision and the foundation upon which to build a new world for ourselves. So yes, Black Lives Matter, but you got to Africanize those lives. And that's hard because our people love Negro-ness. And some of us have pushed it up into Blackness. And so many of us have gone full-blown into Africanness. That's why I have to thank my sister for being there with our brother Taki, and they've surrounded themselves with elders and their peers and other young scholars. And so there is something serious happening. And so I'm glad to be here. My wife just celebrated her 84th. In a little bit, I'll be celebrating my 84th. So it's great to see the young people building on the foundations laid and now laying a foundation for the future so we can have a plan. Dr. Amos Wilson said it best. You need to have a knowledge and understanding, and you have to have a plan. And his great plan was manifest in his last masterwork, which was Blueprint for Black Power, an economic, political, and cultural agenda. And
Yes.
what we've been able to do with the happy process is to show how important that economic, political, and cultural process is and has been for the human family. And at the head of that human family are African peoples. Well, and of course, many of us will say, well, there goes Dr. J talking that African stuff again. You can't lose with the African stuff I use. So you all better get on board. Get
I like that.
baptized into the full-blown Africanist. It can be baptized Yoruba style, baptized Akan style, baptized Bantu style, baptized Ethiopian style, baptized Angolan style, South African style, but you need to get baptized into your Africanness. Now that'll help make your Christianity even more powerful because you have to put an African base to it. That'll help make your Islam even more meaningful because you'll have to put the African base to it. Even your Judaism has to have an African base, otherwise it don't fit into nothing. So the great learning traditions, the great spiritual traditions, the great cultural traditions, when you look at them deep and you go to the root, there's that Africanness. And
Yeah.
so we're not jiving. We're trying to look. When the biggest thing in the world in the 1990s was Dr. Leonard Jeffries. I didn't ask for that claim or that fame, but there it was. There were three important personalities on the world stage. I know some of you are going to say, there go that Dr. Jeffries again, trying to come up with something. But look, get any set of newspapers, 90, 1990, 91, 92, and there were three important figures. One was Gorbachev, the president of Russia, and there was a Russian Revolution, and he was in the center of it. And then on the American side, you had another G, and that was Gatti. And you had in the American scene, a lot of which is controlled by organized crime. Every ethnic group had their organized crime. Only people who didn't make it a real part of their culture was us, because we were trying to be cool in terms of our African organizations and whatnot. But then you had Gorbachev, Gatti, and then there was another brother that was raising hell around that time, and that was Dr. J, Len Jeffries.
Yes. Yes.
In fact, people don't, they can't imagine that in the courthouse, in Foley Square Courthouse in New York City, Gotti was on trial for various reasons, the various family connections, called the mafioso. Gorbachev was being questioned about where he was going to go in reference to the future of Russia. And then here is this professor, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, who is in the Foley Square Courthouse because he brought a suit against the City College of New York, the City University of New York, and its various dimensions, 20 plus colleges, and the state of New York, and the Department of Education of the state of New York. And so here is this brother bringing a suit against all of these important parts of the culture. And what did he think he was going to be doing? I have this consciousness in terms of a winning on, we're winners. And so he was in the courthouse. Even Gotti knew that Jeffries was on his move, because when his lawyers and security and everything passed me in the hall, when I was going into my court chamber and he was going into his, Gotti threw up a Black Power fist. Go on, Jeff. Go check out the newspaper. I have to exaggerate. However, the 80s and the 90s were important periods of struggle and change. And emerging out of that was a new flow of knowledge. And that's what we're here to talk about.
Yes. Yes.
And that new flow of knowledge can be symbolized around what we call the scholar warriors. And again, Dr. J is in the mix. And here you have the image of Dr. Leonard Jeffries, who had organized the Black Studies Department at City College and one of the most comprehensive of Black educational institutions trying to Africanize our world. And so next to Dr. J is his partner from the Caribbean, Professor Edward Scobie, outstanding scholar warrior. And when we talk about warrior, we have to make sure that we give him his kudos. He was in the RAF, the Royal Air Force, in World War II, flying planes and knocking German bombardiers out of the sky. Professor Scobie was not only involved in the 1945 struggle against fascism and Nazism, when African peoples after the war met in England, in one of their leading manufacturing cities, Manchester. Scobie was there with the other greats of our African world, particularly the English-speaking African world. So 200 plus Africans, so-called Black Americans, and Black folk from the Caribbean met. And they didn't meet to have a party. They didn't meet to throw up their Black Power fists and then go break into some department stores to get some Gucci bags or some dresses that you risk your life to grab, and then you're gonna come out of the store and they're gonna put this garbage on the internet. They were about life and death struggle for African peoples, not about materialism. It's about spiritualism. They were tapping into the African spiritual power. And the British knew that, so they needed Black people from the Caribbean to join their fighting force. They needed bases in the Caribbean from which to protect themselves from the German submarines. And Scobie was one of those great figures in that history. And in 1969, when I was at City College and I left there to go to San Jose to set up the Black Studies Department in San Jose State College, and one of my prime students was a Black Power, a Blackfish warrior called John Carlos. And he was there in my classes and in my wife's classes in 1969 in the fall. His wife from New York was there. Her sister, Yasmin, was there. And Yasmin's husband, Mel, was there. And so when we're talking about a Black Power fist, for me, it's a very personal thing because this great figure in history, John Carlos, and his partner, Tommy Smith, have left that Black Power fist, and wherever I go, I throw that fist up. I'm with Brother Taki in Nubia, and you see Dr. J wherever he took a picture of some of the Nubian pyramids or temples or the Holy Mount, Jebel Barka. Dr. J is throwing up the Black Power fist. So this is serious in terms of struggle, in terms of imagery, in terms of a plan. There is a plan in place. And brothers like this participated in it. Now look at this. Here you have a Dr. J. But here's his partner, Professor Scobie. We were together for 20 years developing the most comprehensive Black studies program in the world.
Wow.
That included not only Black American studies, Afro-American studies, it included Caribbean studies, it included Brazilian studies, and it included the whole African continent, not just the Nigerian part of it, or the Ghanaian part of it, or the South African part of it. It included the whole African continent, the French-speaking part of it, the Portuguese-speaking part of it, the Islamic-speaking part of it. And so we have to understand that we need to take not a slice of the African pie, we need to take the whole pie.
Yes.
Learn how to make some serious African pie. If you can't handle your development and your consciousness and your values, you ain't going nowhere too far before you get tricked up or get bamboozled by some people who know who you are, but they know you don't know who you are. And so uh, Scobie eventually, Roz and we were there in San Jose for 3 years. And in the first month of setting up this program, in fact, the students and the leaders in San Jose that set it up, they brought me there, said, we want you to develop a Black Studies program for us. This is the document that the state of California approved. And then they wrote on this proposal for setting up this program, the white proposal.
What?
They took it, never put it in my hand, threw it down, and said, now develop us a Black Studies program. They didn't realize they got the right person
Yes, they got the right one.
because we're talking about 69. But by 69, I had already, in 59, I was in Europe studying with who? The great African philosophers and thinkers. In 59, I met Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop's mentor, Alioune Diop, and his great wife, Madame Diop. And they had again been involved in struggle. In 1947, when the war was over, they set up Présence Africaine as a cultural institution, intellectual institution, spiritual institution, an institution where they published the books, they had the conferences. And so they got started in 1947. 1947, other activities were being started. People were reviving the Garvey movement. 1947, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, and of course I have his book right here, the autobiography of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. But this is the volume that you all should get. This is for the novice. So, Dr. J, you're gonna have to take a little beating too. This is the paperback copy.
So, Dr. J, something you said early, because I'm sitting here, I had to take notes so I can just keep up with you. So, in the beginning, you kind of weaved in this whole notion of economics, culture, and politics, which is the backbone of Hopi. Can you just go into a little detail? Well, okay, let me just take that back. I know it's not going to be a little detail. You're going to give us a lot of detail. So give us a lot of detail about economics, culture, and politics.
Oh, certainly. And I'm giving it to you right now.
You and these books, I'll keep popping up.
I'm giving it to you right now. This is a real warrior, a Pan-African warrior. Yeah. And this is his paperback, his autobiography, why he did what he did. And this is a upgraded version. These are two volumes. This is the one for the people who are just getting started. This is the one that goes deep. You talk about a scholar warrior, a leader, a Pan-Africanist. And so what I'm trying to say that you can wrap the cloth around myself and Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben and Professor Smalls, Professor Scobie, which we have done in this imagery here. Mm-hmm. I want to show that this is our contribution to the struggle. But there were people who were setting up whole nations coming out of the war. You have Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, but in East Africa, you had the legacies of Julius Nyerere. Now, we tell some people, they say, well, who the hell is Julius Nyerere? And that's our problem. His was a hell of a brother fighting in East Africa to establish an economic, political, and cultural process. And just as Nkrumah called it Pan-Africanism, others had different worrying for the same process, linking the economics is the first principle of the universe. If you do not control your economics,
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to go far. Every living thing has to have an economic component, and that's your creative, productive capability. Every cell of your body has to have an economic component, otherwise, it will die. Every human formation has to have that. Otherwise, it will not be able to survive. But you can't have that by itself. You have to expand that. And so, what my sister was saying, Dr. J, you need to get into that whole process that inspired Brother Taki to do what he did. And
Yes.
then, so again, I had to go to the books.
Yes.
I've been trying to tell Negroes when I was the biggest and hottest thing in the early 90s, and I spoke to 100, 200, 300 universities around the world. When I went to Columbia University or Harvard or one of these places, the students saw me coming in with this flowing African robe and a crown on and whatnot. Then there was a brother there next to me. That was my brother, my younger brother, who's into a heavy African Asian martial arts. Marlon, he's master Professor Marlon Jeffries. His son, his oldest son, is Hakeem Jeffries, the congressman. But the Jeffries brothers, Marlon and Leonard, back in the day, they called me Little Lenny. But Little Lenny had a big daddy who was 6'5", so that I was named after my father, Leonard. And so, but the important thing is this linkage in the family. My brother was in the service in 1958. He had left Biloxi, Mississippi, where he was being trained, and they got these brothers who were hot in Mississippi because they wasn't taking no mess. And so they said, get them out of the South as soon as possible, send them to Europe. And so my brother was in Germany in 1958. I went over to study in Europe in 1959. And so the Jeffries boys met each other. I was heading to a big conference in Sweden, and he was on leave. I actually went to his Air Force base. Now, I'm mentioning that because we got to talk about the family and the transmission of knowledge and
Yeah.
what. And so here is a brother. His name is Jesse Sharp. I've never met the guy, but he's produced a Jeffries volume.
Oh,
The book is called Close Your Mouth. The book is called the Dr. Jeffries Reader.
wow. I've never seen this book. I've never heard of this book.
Hey, people say, Dr. J, what have you published? People are publishing books. Don't even ask me about it. This is a publication of my life's work here by his
Wow.
brother, and he put it on the internet. And years ago, Brother Reggie said, there's somebody who has a Jeffries Reader. Do you know this guy? I said, no. So Reggie made contact with him, and he was producing this volume for $13.95, and for $9.95 you could get a loose leaf volume on the internet. So this brother has produced, and what does he have on the cover? He has the triangle that you want me to get into.
Yes. That is awesome.
He
Wow.
has the triangle on this book, the Jeffries Reader. Now, but what is beautiful about it, it has economics, politics, and culture, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. My whole thing is to develop for you and for others a systems understanding of things. You need a systems analysis, and because you're up against systems, and if you don't know how to deal with systems, you're going to be in trouble. If you want to build your own systems, you have to understand systems and tradition. And in the middle of this circle, linking the 3 points of the pyramid, the brother has the image of my hat with the feather of my hat on the top of it.
Wow.
Yes, somebody I never met, but he was nourished by the teachings out there, and he was able to make it work. Now he takes the European African model versus the European model, because everybody has to have economics. So there's a European economics and they had to have European politics and European culture. But for me, the African model is the upright pyramid. And that model involves uh, the African value system of the three C's. Now I'm trying to get a little cute, but
Yes.
had it worked out. The three C's: communal, cooperative, and collective. Communal, living together. Africans live together. It's the European that wants to have a separate room, a separate house on a hill. Africans live in compounds where you can share. You live together, you eat together, you birth together. When a child is being born, the people are around waiting for this spiritual happening to take place. And when you go to your rewards, you're not by yourself. Africans are there calling upon the ancestors, calling upon the spirits yet to be born to join them in celebrating this spirit that was among us. Now, why am I emphasizing spirit? Because at the heart of the African value system are the three C's: communal, cooperative, working together, communal, living together, and collective, sharing. If you work the fields together, when the crop is brought in, you share the crop. It's not capitalism where it's me, me, me. It's Africanism where it's we, we, we. And so this is the type of understanding that was clear to me because I met the Africans in Africa and in Europe in 59, 60, but by 61, I was in Africa after I did a year in law school. And I realized that my fighting in being a Thurgood Marshal was what I, as a youngster, wanted to be. But now that I saw the world and I see what's out there, uh, I said, I need to get into this African thing. Now, interesting enough, while I'm in Europe meeting Sheikh Anta Diop and other great African leaders and whatnot, my wife is in Africa on a program called Operation Crossroads Africa. She is in Nigeria. So she actually is a pioneer in this African nest because she got into it before any of us. 1960, she's in a village in Nigeria, Ehamufu. Ehamufu is a little village near a great potential happening. Ehamu is a little village in eastern Nigeria, but they had plans to expand that uh, Nigerian community, and the plan was to put a university there, and that's the University of Nigeria. And the brother who was planning it was a great figure in Nigerian history, and he became the prime minister of Nigeria. But he took the model that came out of America because he went to school in America. He went to Lincoln University.
Oh, okay.
He took the model of the when America was trying to expand in the 1850s and 60s, and they were trying to make the land across the Mississippi work. And they knew they had to have economics, politics, and culture as a learning space. They created the land grant colleges. And those land grant colleges have been the key to development economically and politically and culturally. Because the traditional college for our world, meaning American world, and for the English speaking world, the traditional college was Oxford and Cambridge, where the elites was trained to rule the world. And that ain't going to produce no serious economics, politics, and culture. That's going to produce some haughty, tooty, naughty uh, uh, men. And the standard man that it produced was somebody called The Founder. One of my books is up there called The Founder. And I'm talking about, and there he is. I'm talking about a brother whose name reverberates around the world, and some people don't know no better, want to get a scholarship with the name. I'm talking about the Rogues Scholarships, Fellowships,
Yes.
named after a thug,
Wow.
Cecil Rhodes, who is responsible for coming up with an economic, political, and cultural plan to control the richest
Mm.
part of Southern Africa.
Mm.
He was able to tap into another brother called the Founder. Now, his book is this thick. That's Cecil Rhodes' story. But this other founder, his book is this thick. I don't want to grab it because my sister would say, Dr. J, you're going too heavy, but our people need to, they need a little, lighten up a little bit.
I'm not gonna say that.
But
I'm not gonna say that.
but you got to have these two founders as part of your book. Well, I got Malcolm X and all about. Look, Malcolm was here for a moment, and it's extraordinary that somebody could be here for a moment and leave such a legacy. And then his partner,
Mhm.
well, Betty was his partner in terms of producing the six babies, but his partner in struggle was also only here for a moment.
Mhm.
And both of them left after they did their thing. They left us, but with the image of struggle and sacrifice. So I'm talking about the relationship of the 60s, 50s, and 60s, where these brothers went through the transformation and socialization of being Africans. And we see them as different parts of the struggle, but I see them as a family continuum.
Mm. Yeah.
I'm talking about somebody who was born January the 15th, called Martin Luther King. And then somebody who was born in that same period of time, El Haj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X.
Yes.
We can have fights over who was who and what was what, but those brothers knew that one of them was taking the struggle in the urban areas, using the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's rural and new consciousness of Islam, and another was taking the black church out of the South, but he was taking it to new levels because he not only had his father, a preacher, as a mentor and the whole tradition of black preachers, but he had somebody from India who had been in South Africa and then went home to India and led the way to Indian independence in 1947. I'm talking about Mahatma Gandhi.
Wow. Yeah.
People say Mahatma Gandhi didn't do things for black folk. He was in South Africa, or he was in South Africa trying to find his humanity because the system in South Africa was a system of dehumanization.
Mm.
And they created a structure of white folks at the top. But white folks at the top wasn't the real deal because which white folks were at the top? The first white folks to get to South Africa came in 1652 or thereabout, and they came from Amsterdam, Rotterdam. They were the Dutch, and they just got finished with a struggle with the English. And what was they struggling over? Who was going to control this new lands discovered called America,
Yes.
new world?
Yeah.
So in 1625, 1610, Henry Hudson comes to the New World and goes up this large body of water called the Hudson River. So they eventually named it after Henry Hudson. So the Dutch have a claim, but the English are always out there at the head of the white racist group. And the English said, no, we want to claim this new land. And so by 1625, 23, 24, 25, they were finding their way to this new land, which was called New York. But before it was called New York, it was called what? New Amsterdam.
Yeah.
So the Dutch put their staff down first. I claim this for us. Well, there were some people up in Harlem Heights, and they said, wait a minute, who are those strangers that came to the lower part of our island? So let's send some of our scouts down there and see who they are. And the scouts got down there and said, well, we don't know who they are, but they certainly ain't ready for America. Instead of having, they got all kinds of clothes like they're ready for a winter. And they got all kinds of funny things. They even got a stick that pops off with some fire.
Oh.
So the Native American population was peeping through the woods to see who was those people planting themselves on the tip of the island. And so eventually they worked their way down and they made the little trades in furs and whatnot. So the Dutch were the first to claim Manhattan. But who comes? The Johnny come lately, here come the English.
Mm-hmm.
English said it, no, we you know, we got a base in the Caribbean, and so we claim all of this. Now, see, this is what we got to learn: the mindset of the European. How the hell can you discover somebody else's land and the people are there? What kind of discovery? They discovered your ass and didn't know who the hell you was, and so they didn't have their poison arrows and stuff ready for your butt. And they went and thought you was there to trade, etc. Because you look like you all got heavy boots on and this and that. But at any rate, the encounter of the Dutch with the Native Americans established New York. It was New Amsterdam. But the Dutch and their British brothers and sisters had been rivals over who's going to control what, just as the Spanish and the Portuguese were rivals over who was going to control what. And so you have, and in the middle of the rivalry is the Pope, who they have to go to him to say, what do I get? Well, the Pope, in his wisdom, in the 1400s now, during the Columbus period, the Pope, in his wisdom, saw that Spain was sending out its ships, Portugal was sending out their ships. They're all from the same little island, meaning in Europe, the Iberian Peninsula, but they had rivalry for who was going to discover the New World. And so the Pope, seeing that these rival Catholic nations was going to go to war with each other, the Pope issued a papal bull, 1492-93, that any lands, and they divided up the world in half, from the North Pole to the South Pole, and gave half of it to Spain and half of it to Portugal. Now, see, this is why we got to understand systems. How the hell can you Europeans, you just discovered some land and automatically you are dividing it up? How can you divide up the world and give half of it to one little piece of a European nation and then give the other? And the Portuguese were trying to get out of Europe and sail down the coast of Africa because they heard that there was an African king in Ethiopia called, well, they eventually named him Prester John. And they thought that by going around Africa, they could catch up to him, which they finally did. And they started making alliances with him because they thought that Prester John, a Christian, Ethiopian Orthodox religion was their reality. And eventually in Egypt, it becomes Coptic religion. But the idea was to have alliances because the Europeans had just been through 500 years of war. See, we that's why systems. What are you talking about? 500 years? I'm talking about the Crusades. I'm talking about in 1096, the Pope Pius the something said that he wanted to get to the Holy Land because during the period before that, you had the Constantinople and you had the Catholic Church being divided between Rome and also Constantinople. So you had an Eastern Orthodox Christian church and you had the Western Christian church, which was based at Rome. So until you can see and understand these things, you can't put the system together. That's why it looks like I'm going here and I'm going there, but I'm trying to tell you it's larger than anything that we can imagine. Control of the planet and its resources, and now control of the universe and its significance. And so we don't have time for conflicts among ourselves. We don't have time to look askant at our women and say that we are men. We got that European male domination thing. And as a result, and just to add a little levity to this, uh, Pope Pius the whatever in 1096 said we're going to take Jerusalem back, the Holy Land. So they started the Crusades. Those Crusades went on for 400 to 500 years. You had the first Crusades, and to mount a crusade, it took you 3 or 4 months to prepare, to get the people ready, get the supplies, etc. And then uh, uh, the second crusade and the third crusade. And sometimes the Catholics would win, and you'd have a hero like Richard the Lionheart, but sometimes they would lose, and then they'd have to give up the so-called Holy Land. So you have to see the European not fighting a little war, fighting a war that went on for years. And then it was for the men up on their horses and with all their armor and shit. And I was wondering, how you up on a horse, you got all this metal around you. I said, well, how would you go to bathroom? In order to get up on the horse, people had to help you get up. So once you up there and you travel and whatnot, and you got your armor going, so they had an exhibit, King Tut, at the museum in New York, and then the next exhibit next to it was Europeans and the Crusades. And so I said, my curiosity after the King Tut exhibit, my curiosity was to see what this man is on this horse. He got all this armor covering everything. I said, how did he go to bathroom? He couldn't. He couldn't take. He couldn't get off the horse. And so I saw between his legs was a mesh. And so all he did was pee right through the mesh, and he's all right to go. But then I said to myself, now the mesh is for peeing. What if he had to do a number two? What the hell would he do a number two? I guess they just got constipated. So I mean, I'm joking about this, but this was a real deal for me.
Yeah.
But the Crusades, hundreds of years of European, and the last Crusades was the ultimate. Well, we had a sister who got involved in the Crusades, and she was stupid. She should have known better, because the European culture worships European. They don't worship the male and the female principle like African and Native American culture. And so this woman led the French armies, and this was a war between England and France, the 100 Years' War. And they had 200 or 300 years war. When they fight wars, they don't have a 3-year war. They got a 30-year war, 100-year war, 60-year war.
Yeah.
Her sister, she helped the French forces become victorious in the fight with England. So people asked her, and she was a warrior. She had her armor and stuff. And the priest asked her, well, why did you do what you did to become a hero and a victorious hero for our people? And she said, well, the Spirit told me to take up arms and fight for my people. The priest said, what? Spirit told you? So the priest said, wait a minute. Would you make that statement before a council of the bishops and the Pope's messengers? And she said, yes. So Joan of Arc was stupid enough to go before the men and tell them that she did what she did because the Spirit of God told her to take up arms to defend her people. And when she was stupid enough to look at her men friends and say, yes, God spoke to me, they looked at each other. They didn't wait a moment. They said, burn her ass at the stake. God don't speak to no women. I mean, this is the history that y'all got to know exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
See? And then we've got to put our little part of it together, get through this European history, and then put the African history together.
Yeah.
So that's why we go to the books. And so
When,
here's the European value system. You turn it, the European model, it's upside down. It's the 3 Ds: domination, destruction, and death. For what purpose? Profit by any means necessary. The African value system is the 3 Cs: communal, living together, cooperative, collective. And the value system is centered around spirituality.
and Dr. J, who wrote that book again? We have a lot of people asking about the author.
The young man,
Yes.
well, I'm going to try to contact him and order 1,000 books.
Wow.
So you're going to have to go through me.
There it is.
Hey, but his name is Jesse Sharp.
Jesse Sharp.
And he has it compiled and edited by Jesse Sharp. Now, interesting enough, my grandfather was murdered by the Klan in 1917. His name was Jesse. But then when you open it up, there is the Jeffries Reader first page.
Wow.
You go into the second page, and here's what the brother says. So you never know when Africans are connecting and Africanizing. The Leonard Jeffries information contained in this reader has been compiled from various websites. As a student of history and politics, which I believe all Black people should be, let me say that again. As a student of history and politics, which I believe all Black people should be, Black capitalized, among other things, I find Dr. Jeffries to be one of those scholars, scientists, lecturers, and historians that we should all be aware of. Though the information contained within is freely available on the web, I decided to compile the most interesting and useful pieces because the internet has its limitations too. And who needs to be on attached quotes to it all in time? With that in mind, please read on. As you read, learn, grow, challenge, and pave the way for others. Hotep. Now, I mean, all I need was this page. I didn't need nothing else. This brother is serious. I don't care what. Brother, produce more like this. Y'all call him up and say he needs to produce Dr. Jeffries' and his American Odyssey. In other words, I done lived 10 or 15 lives with Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark.
Yeah.
You need to contact your brother and say, Dr. J was raising me. Now, other books by Jesse Sharp: Adult Poetry, Men Folk Talking, Hurry Up, Home, Education, my Alphabets Learning Book, Pictures and Poetry and ABCs, my Alphabet Learning Book. So this brother is seriously dealing with socialization and acculturation. And that's why the African process, socialization, how do you get your values, your beliefs, your role models, and acculturation? How do you fit into society? And we are trying to fit in like pseudo Negroes or Afro-Peans, etc. But we're not trying to fit in as Africans. And until we have that as our main objective, synthesizing the various parts of our experience and come up with the new African, the new African warrior, the new African scholars, the new African, and male and female. No other groups in the world have raised the female warrior like the Africans have. And so we need to have a socialization process that produces, we talk about the warrior scholars. Yes, they're there. But none of us would be doing nothing if the person who was the warrior in my life was my mother, 5 foot.
Yes.
Leola Jeffries. My father was 6'5". He was a great brother. He was a great father. He wanted to be in the Afro-American Negro baseball leagues. And he always made sure we were taken care of, and we had the biggest car and the first people to get a refrigerator. My mother said, your father took care of business. So what anybody else say, he took care of business. Well, we come out of a male and female process in the African tradition. And here is the warrior woman.
Yes.
This is the one who could tell the world who she was, not worried about being sent to being burned at the stake like Joan of Arc. She spoke her truth to the world, and it's still reverberating. Anthony Browder and others produced a compliment. This is her own work. She was inspired by various brothers, and particularly she had the crest theory of confrontation and discussions on what she believed to be the most pernicious force on the planet, the system of racism slash white supremacy. Most of y'all is playing with it. This sister was ready to give her life for it. And so they produced a complimentary volume since she made her transition, and she's up there with the great warrior queens of the African world. They produced a complimentary volume that Tony Browder took the lead in, and it's the Osiris Papers. So her work was the Isis Papers. So this Osiris Papers is emulating what she put out years ago was the Isis Papers. She took upon the Nile Valley consciousness and the Nile Valley frame of reference, and she became a warrior queen. And so when they wanted to compliment her and analyze the work that she left us, they named the Osiris Papers. This complementarity is a male and a female principle. And that's why I'm so happy that I was able to marry an African woman who had been to Africa before I was, African woman who was into African spirituality, African woman who had family coming up from South Carolina, African woman who found her family found their place in Harlem, at the heart of Harlem, 115th Street, right around the corner from 116th Street and 7th Avenue. And that Harlem center was where El Haj Malik later, but initially Malcolm X found his home, and the mosque was established there, including the restaurant, etc. And Rosin used to, as the oldest girl, used to do the laundry and stuff, and she'd make her way Saturday to the laundry, and it was right across the street from the mosque, and she'd be looking at it across the street. What the hell's going on there? And there's some people on ladders speaking to the crowd, the street speakers. They not only did it at 125th Street, they did it at 116th Street. So Rosin had her introduction to a struggle in the village of Harlem, where various religious groups met, and Daddy Grace and Father Divine and this one and that one. These were people who had a value system of communal, cooperative, and collective spiritual development. And so no matter what you say about the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, it's an African formulation of Islam that includes caring and sharing, communal and cooperative, the male principle and the female principle together. And so the deep roots of it go right back to the Nile Valley, where everybody seems to have gotten their foundations. There is all the Abrahamic religions, meaning Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, claim the Nile Valley because that's the source of the early human development. And that's the particular part of the earth where you linked up not only with Mother Nature in terms of the Nile and its overflow, but you linked up to the life of the spirit world in the sky, the stars, the moon, the sun, and you built a spirit world outside of your humanness into a divine arena. So that's why this happy thing is such a magnificent. It's going to produce a whole new school of knowledge for us to tap into. People are going to take a piece of it and run here, and another body going to take a piece of it and run there. And the link between Kemet, the northern part, which is referred to as Egypt, and the southern part, which is referred to as Nubia. And so that Valley, what Brother Taki was able to introduce me to. And so you need to get, and we need to make some more copies. They're going to be Jeffries is going to put his, with the virus, I'm going to do a good washing of my hands, but I'm going to put my hands on it. So you can have the initial, how happy got started was with Taki going to the Nile, then wanting a partner to carry his bags for him, and that was me. And so we had an experience,
Yes.
a spiritual experience in the Nile. And I only wish that my wife had been with me because we've shared the spiritual experiences in West Africa and with the kings and queens. And but she was working on her PhD at Yale, and so, but Brother Taki uh, introduced me to the spirit life of our people. Most people go for tourism sensations and
Mhm.
titillization. I was with the people, and that was a difference. And to go when I first went with Dr. Ben, uh, and that was I think 92 or 90, 82 or 81. When we took the plane from Cairo down to Luxor, and you're going to go into the valley and Aswan too, but you're going to go across the river to the Valley of the Kings and the Queens, etc. And then Dr. Ben said, um, we get started early because Egypt is hot. So we need to get up at 4, get out by 5, and then we can go into the tombs and the temples. And so he said that the building that's in front of us, this is the great lodge. This is the Petit University. This is the most important uh, building in Egypt in a certain way. And I had heard about the Pillared Temple and the lodge and all of that. So he said, go upstairs and go to sleep. And I followed them upstairs. But then I turned my black ass around and I snuck downstairs and I went over the guards and the fences and I got in the middle of that sacred temple and spirit hit me and I ain't been the same since. And so that was in Kemet. But then when Taki later took me south of Kemet and we went into Nubia and we flew into Khartoum and whatnot and the sister city there. And then we went on our journey into the holy mount, Jebel Barkal. And this is the holy mount from which much of the early consciousness of the Africans, I mean, this was the primal waters of Nun and the mind of the world rising up out of the waters. And you come over this land, and it's nothing but flat land, and all of a sudden here you have this emergence out of the earth. And so Taki and I had to go. We were in the temples there, and when we got there, it got dark. And I said, "Well, we got to I got to have a record of being in here, Taki." So we had Brother Rusty, who was his assistant, his Nubian uh, Egyptian brother, and so Rusty and I took pictures at the shrine, and the shrine in the Jebel Barka Holy Temple of Amun. The shrine was up to my chest, and I said, "We got to take this." And so I got the spirit in the north with the Karnak Temple, and then I got it down south with the Nubians,
Yeah.
and then I already had it with the Africans in West Africa. So when y'all see Dr. J moving through life with power and dignity and grace, fearless, raising the African truth, that's because I got the spirit with me. My mother and father and my family had given it to me coming African American style. And then I got it in the West African style. And then I got it in the East African style with Jomo Kenyatta and his people, the Mau Maus. And then I got it legitimately,
Mm.
Kemet and Nubia. So,
Yes.
so y'all look, under normal circumstances, as you see me flow through life with my flowing African robes, you could touch the hem of my garment, but I wouldn't want y'all to be doing that. But you can purchase a tape.
Yeah.
We from this, we need to produce 10,000 of these suckers and have them getting the 2 tapes. Uh, uh, and then look, they can't do nothing but grow with it, you know, and don't go around beating up on white folks. This is it. You all have stole our history. Now I want a job. Is that all you want as a job? You need to take your knowledge back so that you can pass it on for generations to come.
Yeah.
But what is fantastic is that all of these brothers came up with a spiritual source of what they're going to want to do. Nyerere came up with a special economic and social process, which was referred to as African socialism.
Yeah.
And Nkrumah came up with a process uh, of African socialism. He took his uh, African Akan traditions. He went to Black America to study. He went to Lincoln University. And so he got the Black church. He went to be a preacher. But then after the Black Power, uh, the Pan African Conference, he had spent a couple of years in England before he went back to Ghana to become a Pan African giant. But don't just limit it to of one person like Nkrumah or Jomo Kenyatta. You have to see them as a family because they were together in the conference in Manchester. Who was there as the elder scholar? Jomo Kenyatta. He was an anthropologist. He had gone to study anthropology. And so eventually he becomes the giant who takes the Mau Mau movement and he writes a great book on facing Mount Kenya. The Africans even knew how to take a natural landmark like this volcanic hill called Mount Kenya and see the spirituality around it. So that was his great work, facing Mount Kenya. So you can't talk about Jomo Kenyatta if you don't have that work. But then they had a warrior group called the Mau Mau who wanted to take back their land because the Europeans, like the founder, Cecil Rhodes, and his partner, founder, I didn't complete that process, but the two founders I have here, one is Cecil Rhodes, who had a dream way beyond any African dream that we know about. His dream was to link Cairo to the Cape.
Oh, wow.
And the Cape I'm talking about is South Africa. This is the book that I did, edited for the World Council of Churches. And we were trying to get the world churches to support the struggle in South Africa. And so this is the crisis in South Africa. That's was produced in 1993 when I spent a year, almost a year, translating Cheikh Anta Diop's great work, Civilization or Barbarism. And usually I have that book available, and I also read his introduction where he dedicates the book. Now, this is a revolutionary. Cheikh Anta Diop. He came out of a Muslim, African Muslim tradition, the Morids in Senegal. And then, because Senegal was targeted by the French as the, uh, how should I say it? They put it in Nile Valley Texas, context. The rejected stone. Hey, we're getting into a little bit of masonry and Nile Valley uh, iconography and whatnot. The rejected stone. What the French did was, like other Europeans, they cultivated a group of Africans to use them to help them develop their colonial empires. And so the up comes from a Muslim tradition of an African Muslim group. Their Mecca was Tuba, and they were called the Morids. So he has a deep African foundation. Then, because Senegal was used by the French as the place where uh, they were going to train Africans to help them rule their empire. And so they trained these soldiers called Senegalese tirailleurs. And uh, they used them for all kinds of purposes, including fighting their wars. World War One, you had a million of them or so more fighting to help save France. So Diop comes from a deep Muslim African tradition He comes from a specialized colonialism where they picked a set of Africans called Senegalese, and they were going to make them into black Frenchmen, never fully being Frenchmen, but they were going to have the best education that they could get. We were going to train them to use modern technology, and then we were going to get them to come by the millions to help save France. And so that's why we need to look at this history in its systemic dimensions and see what. So Diop, strong Muslim, heavy education of the French. And so this rejected stone, black men, by the French, when they saw the need, and they had a revolution in 1848, and that a revolution in 1848 established the Second French Republic. The First Republic died in the Napoleon era when the French went crazy over freedom and they started chopping off everybody's head. And the freedom finally went into a reign of terror as Europeans were doing in each other. And by 1848, they established the Second Republic, and the Senegalese soldiers helped them out. So they gave citizenship to the Senegalese. And they 4 cities in Senegal were the commune, the quatre communes. In French, that means the 4 cities. Saint Louis, the capital, Rufisque, Dakar, and Gorée, the island of Gorée. So the foundation of these brothers being processed into Europeanness, which strengthened them, but somehow they broke out of the European mold and they became the pillars of Africanness. And that's what we have to see. Even though they've sucked you into this European thing and you kissing their butts like crazy and getting your rewards, nice little houses here and nice little degrees there. But the real deal is we have a world and a universe to put our African hands and minds on. And so you can't go for some clothes, some Gucci bags that you'd have busted into a store, risked your life, climbing over the glass to get into some store. When our people come from another foundation, but we've been processed out of ourselves. So when I used to go in the 80s and 90s, speaking to the colleges, I would go into a little rap, because I would come in with my big African robe, and I know the African students, black students, whether they come from Brazil or Caribbean or Black America, they ain't going for the robe. And then the brother or crown, who does he think he is? And so when I come in with my African presence, I got to get next to them. So I go into my rap after I say Hotep. And they don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I said, Hotep is an African greeter. It means peace. So your response is Hotep. So they're trained well enough to know that since the person who came to be honored and speaking has asked you to respond in Hotep, he's teaching you a little something. So they would say Hotep. Don't know what it means, didn't feel it, but they responded. Then I go into a little rap. After I did my little Hotep, I would say that we have to, I'm here. So I want you to understand and pay attention to what I'm trying to say. And so I would say, forget about the looks and get into the books.
Mm.
Stop worrying about the behind and get into your African mind. I mean, they just couldn't believe it. This dude, he's cool. He got his little thing. And after I had done with all of that, then I said, well, we have to honor our ancestors. Yeah. Now, I'm at Harvard, the big Harvard speech. There's 1,500 people. Malcolm spoke at that same place 30 years before me. And then so here I come in with my little rap and whatnot, and my little Hotep and whatnot. And so there's hundreds of black students, because I told them, go get the black students from all those schools in New England and bring them. And so there was hundreds of them sitting in the front. And then surrounding them was 1,000 white students in back of them and in the balcony. But my message was for both student groups, but I had a special message for the black ones. So I told them, nothing important happens in Africa. And we didn't even do it tonight, but we really did. You're coming and getting this stuff together, and we were paying. And Rosin tried to get the linguist staffs up. She said she didn't want you to come in here and see linguist staffs, and she got 20 linguist staffs there. Do you know what that means? What spirituality that captures? And so that was our libation when you came, and here we were trying to get this thing together.
Wow.
I said nothing important happens in Africa without the libation. And so then when I start pouring the libation, then the students realize this is something, and they're saying Hotep and Ashe and this and that. They say this brother is tapping into something. Then they started getting up. They started standing up, as I'm going through history and whatnot. And before you know it, you had hundreds of Black students standing with their ancestors, separating them from the brilliant Harvard students and what. And so there's a strategy you have to have. And Dr. J has mastered that strategy because he's had the teachers. If your mentors are Dr. Clark and Dr. Bed, you see, and Professor Scobie, and then not only those few, you have Dr. Chancellor Williams, and you have others that are. But Dr. Jeffries, what did you have to do with Chancellor Williams? You claim all this. Put up or shut up. But show me some evidence that you have something to do with Chancellor Williams. Well, here it is. It is.
Let me get a close up of that.
Okay. Here's Dr. J with my partner for life, Dr. Roz, with the new Queen Mother, Dr. Arikana. She broke from the AU and she's organizing Black people with serious understanding of that economics, and we need to explain it. And then Rosin was able to put in the picture my buddy who I met in '69 when I was setting up the Black Studies Department in San Jose. The same week I met him, I met Alex Haley. Same week I met him and Alex Haley, I met Ron Dellums. And so Rosin slipped in Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory read us spiritually. He had just met us, and he read my wife and I spiritually. And we had just come back from one of our African trips, and then got the school year started. He said, I would like you to take my daughters, my two oldest children, to Africa. Now, we take everybody to Africa. We've taken groups and families, but to take some babies? And so he was serious, him and his wife, Lil. And so they wanted their children to have that African experience that he could feel exuding from us. And so we did take the Gregory, Lynn and Michelle. They were 8 and 11. We took a traveling course. The traveling course was spending a month through Black America studying the urban crisis, and then going to Africa. After you went through the South, the West Coast, the South, and got to Washington and New York, and then spend a month in Africa, traveling through several of the countries. And so these young ladies had this experience, and we had community people. Half of the people were community people, and half of them were our students and these two little girls. And so Roz and I were moving with our formulation. We weren't looking for all students. We weren't looking for rich that could pay for an African experience. We wanted the community. And so those Dick Gregory girls, when we flew to Paris to catch the plane to go to Africa, there was 35 of us or so at the airport, Black people. And all of a sudden, a powerful breeze came across us, and we didn't know what was happening. And then we looked up, and there she was, with all her glory, Josephine Baker. She was at the Paris airport. She saw 35 Black people. She said, I got to go see who those Black people are. So she came rushing to us. And when we told her these are Dick Gregory's babies, she said, oh my God, I knew them when they were toddlers. Josephine Baker. welcoming us to Paris and sending us off to Africa. And when we got to Africa, same thing happened. We met Sekou Touré and other great leaders. And while we were in Guinea, we met Sekou in the capital, Conakry. But then we went up into the mountains because I had done a workshop there and work camp there in 63. And then I had been back there in 65. And I had been there in 62. So I'm going up into the mountains to recapture some of my Africanness. And as we go further up into the mountains, past Mamou, where we had the work camp, and then we go up to Pita and Dalaba. And at Dalaba is where we met another African spiritual experience. This is a beautiful part of Guinea, and in fact, the French go there for R&R, rest and retirement. Instead of going back to Europe, you can go into the mountains of Guinea and you get temperate climate. Well, we're walking through the mountains to get to this person, and she's living in a 5-room hut with a 2-story roof, thick, the roof, and the 5 rooms had red carpeting. And she came out of her home overlooking this mountain range to greet us. I can still see her and feel her, just as I can still see and feel Josephine Baker. And when she saw us with the babies, she went crazy. And who was that? Miriam Makeba.
Wow.
Of Kwame Ture, who we met with Sekou Touré in the capital and in Conakry. And then we went up, and in Dalaba, they had this beautiful home. These people built these fantastic homes. And like I said, it was large enough to have 5 rooms, and all 5 rooms had red carpet. Now, you cannot make these things up. This is the story, the spirit speaking to us and speaking to the Tony Browders of the world and these others in Taki. And now he's spreading it out to y'all. This is the ancestors speaking to us. We got a job for y'all to do, to take this knowledge and dispense it so it can reinforce our people to be able to stand and rise. And of course, our great sister, she had a poem, and Still I Rise. And so, and she, of course, was with Malcolm in Ghana in 1964, May, and I was there with Malcolm too. However, I was in charge of all of West Africa. So, but I was going to go pay my respects to Malcolm. And, but unfortunately, a death occurred in one of our workshops for the first time. I had been 10 years involved with this. And for the first time, someone died. A fellow from Canada got malaria, he died. So I had to bury him. So I couldn't worry about shaking Malcolm's hand. I had responsibility to take care of. And eventually the family from Canada said he loved Africa, so arranged for a burial for him in Africa, which we did. And but Malcolm and I was crossing paths. And so I have Alice Wyndham. She was there. She was taking pictures. And I have a picture on my wall of Malcolm dressed in the Nigerian outfit. And but he didn't have much time to spend in Nigeria, but he had a chance to come from Mecca to Cairo and meet the African leaders, and then come down across North Africa and into Africa. And so Malcolm, along with King, had this global reach, and they brought it to us. They capsulized it to make us break out of this mindset that the European has, the social slavery that he has. And so you take the Garvey and you put him in the mix with King and Malcolm, and you got the victory. You got the pablum that we need for victory. And most people, I ain't got no time for Garvey. Well, you may not have, but you have to understand him as one of the greatest of our African leaders. He represents that African principle of the rejected stone. And when Taki took me into the pyramids, and we're crawling into the pyramids, and then you see the outer stones are the outer layer, but there's a structure inside that has this stone that holds this thing together. The construction of the pyramids, that rejected stone, and that's part of the Muslim, that's part of the Mason tradition. The rejected stone is the keystone. Now, I'm not going to go into any deeper than that. We're going to have another session on that.
Yeah,
But,
we got to bring you back, Dr. J.
but Garvey was the rejected stone. He was too dark, too African, broad lips, nose, and but his father had taught him how to take care of business, and so but he was rejected in Jamaica. What are you saying, Dr. J? Well, we can get into it. He was too dark for the rulers of Jamaica, who in many instances had a mulatto complex.
Mm.
So he couldn't bring that heavy Africanness. The Jamaican people were not ready for it. Eventually they got ready. Manley and the rest of them were part of the mulatto conference. They got ready and they got their political thing together. A brother who I have here, Dudley Thompson. Where is Dudley? Right here. He was with Nkrumah and all of them at the Pan-African Conference. And again, he's from that mulatto, but he was a Pan-African. He was a Garveyite. He was the big brother for me, Dudley Thompson. And so this family, global family coming together is so significant. We need to appreciate it. We're not trying to play with you. We're trying to give you the power. And the power is what you have in here and what you have in here. And then physically, you're a superior. That's why you've been able to be the foundation of the human family. And what Dr. Francis Cress Welsing said, you have melanin. Melanin gives you the power. This blackness is something you need to be proud of because it allows you to function in a sun-drenched universe and whatnot. So there's so much that we need to be about. And then here is a group of leaders. There's the head man. He was a ruffian, Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen. He was going to make you deal with the Nile whether you liked it or not and go deep into the Nile. But then here is Dr. Clark, his partner in Harlem. They only live 2 blocks from each other. 2 different personalities. One, I've got to bring my people to the Nile Valley and to all of the traditions in Africa. He didn't give a damn about the rest of Africa. Dr. J, what do you say? His role was to give us the Nile. That's enough of a chore. He said, let others take care of the rest of Africa. And the others did. Dr. Clark took us everywhere in West Africa, Senegal and Mali and Ghana and Nigeria and even further south. And so, but then a person who was the dark glass persons in here. They're people you don't know nothing about, but they're part of the family mix.
Yeah.
This mulatto one there, that's John Jackson.
Oh.
John Jackson was the mentor of Dr. Clark. He was the one who produced Introduction to African Civilization. He had some mentors. They had the Harlem History Club. Now, out of these history clubs and these lectures and whatnot, sprang a movement that is now part of the African Renaissance. It's been going on for the last 50 years. I call it the 50-year turning point of history, 1945 to 1995. When you process the material that I'm trying to give you, and this is one of our sessions, this won't be the last, but there's a 50-year turning point of history. 1945 was what? The Manchester Conference. And who was there? All of these great brothers, led by a mulatto. But Dr. J, why are you playing that mulatto stuff? And it's a part of our reality. Mm. The super black was Garvey.
Super black.
Black beyond black. He was so black he had to leave Jamaica, and he went to Costa Rica, and he did get a better reception there. So but he still was too black. And so where did he have to come? To the fount of serious blackness, Black America. And in Black America, he was able to grow and develop. He pulled his brothers from the Caribbean together. He pulled Black Americans together. He hooked up with the organization because in Black America, we were organized. Our churches were organized. The Masonic groups were organized. The Sisters of Eastern Star were organized. On Sunday was when we stopped. It was our day, and after church, we'd be marching through Harlem. He was able to take that marching and take it to another level. He said we need to have the Black Star nurses organized and have them march. We need to have the Black this and the Black that. So Garvey found firm, fertile ground in Black America and helped to move us. But then he got into the mulatto conflict with W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a great Pan-Africanist. But he had a fight with Garvey, and I was so embarrassed because both of them were part of my pablum. My African Virginia mother raised me on Booker T because Booker T had come up out of slavery and had said we need to take control of our economics, our politics, and our culture and build our own institutions. And in fact, we need to build the institutions and we need to manufacture the bricks that go into the institution. We need to grow our own food. We need to produce our own shoes. We need to, and so Booker T said, take control of your economics and then develop your own politics. And then be sure and comfortable in your culture. And so Booker T was, my mother and them were farmers, so Booker T was, I was introduced initially, and my brother as well. And then W.E.B. was doing a study. He was one of the first Black intellectuals. He could have gone into the white world. He was light enough to that, but his passion, his mission was to find the Blackness in him and enhance it for us. And so he could have gone to Harvard, but he went to Fisk. Fisk was just one of those Black schools that came out of the Civil War and post-Civil War, and a few of the schools like Lincoln and whatnot existed before. But the Black school, he was looking for his Blackness. And so luckily, even though he got into an unfortunate conflict with Garvey, but he helped to set up the Niagara Falls movement. He went to Niagara Falls, and then from there they formed the NAACP and whatnot. And they were at the time that in South Africa they were forming the ANC. The ANC in South Africa is formed in 1913 or so. NAACP is formed in 1910. The Divine Nine are formed between 1908 and whatnot. By the Divine Nine, I mean the 5 fraternities and the 4 sororities. And Black people knew that you had to organize with each other and use that organization to fight for your dignity and your people's coming from behind you, their future. So what we're involved in is something serious. And so there's John Jackson with glasses. But this brother here, most of y'all don't know him, he got dark glasses too. Both of them lived to be 94 and 95 years old. So the Creator had them on the earth to make sure they reached out for us, okay? Chancellor Williams, Capricorn. His great works are The Destruction of Black Civilization.
Yes.
And he traveled to 50 spots in Africa to get his information, Chancellor Williams. And then he wrote a sequel to The Destruction of Black Civilization, 3,000 years of Africans fighting off the system of white supremacy. He wrote The Rebirth of African Civilization. And of course, he's from South Carolina, again, highly melanized. So there was a difficulty, with that, because our people, we had this mulatto elite, which was a part of our concept. In fact, they used to say Howard University, you couldn't get into Howard University back in the day because you were too dark. And you definitely couldn't get into a fraternity because you had to pass the brown bag test. Oh. If you could pass the brown bag test, then we'll take you in the inner groups. But luckily, that stuff broke up. And that poisoning but that poisoning was the same thing in Jamaica. When Dr. Clark took us in 1972 up to Puerto Rico, to Barranquitas, to map out how you coordinate these Black Studies programs. Then we went to Washington, D.C., across Rosslyn, across from Washington, D.C. We were meeting, how do we get control and start a movement on this? And then he took us to Jamaica in 1972. We went to Jamaica and we took Marcus Garvey's books because they were banned in Jamaica. Okay, and the students, because our students had exploded in the 60s and that struggle was continuing, the Caribbean students exploded in the 70s. And so the students were there saying, we need some of y'all Black folks, rap browns and whatnot, to come down here in Jamaica. And I said, well, y'all, y'all got island, y'all all Black people. He said, no. He said, up there in that mountain, that's the University of the West Indies. That's Mona Heights. One neighborhood is called Bel Air. Another neighborhood is Hollywood and whatnot. In other words, the elite was living up in where the university was, and the Black people were scrounging down. So we have to break that barrier, that unbelievable control over us by color. And so Garvey said he's going to make Black proud of themselves, and he did. Du Bois was doing it his own way. We need a talented 10th, and you need a leadership group that's well trained. You can't expect everybody to be at that level. So they both had what was needed. And so we need to look at what they gave to us, push aside the negative. By 1945, when it was realized that Black people needed to come together to form their association, Dr. Diop had, Dr. Du Bois had started the associations early on, 1900. And early 1900s, and then during the 17 and 1920. Eventually, Garvey's movement captured that whole Pan-African process. But then, when the World War II stops everybody in their tracks, because you got the devil in the form of Hitler and his associates, Mussolini and the rest, then people had to come together. So when the Europeans met in 1945 to set up the United Nations, they were restructuring their world. And later they set up the European Economic Community to restructure their world economically. And then they were able to put the management of the new economics that was built around the Ruhr Valley, the coal and steel community. And then that economic foundation is there. You need the political union, so that's the European Common Market and all of that. All of those institutions were put in place coming up from the ashes of World War II because so much was destroyed. And of course, the gas chambers and ovens, and they talk about 6 million Jews being destroyed, but there was 100 million Europeans killed and maimed in destruction that went on. And so that was World War II. A few years before, in World War One, they did the same thing. Europeans killing Europeans, 100 million of them, killed and maimed, gassed, mustard gas, all kinds of poisoning. It was the Europeans on one side fighting the Europeans on the other. So that's why we need to study these various systems and this insanity that they have. So what did Black folks do in 1945? After the UN meetings, the United Nations being formed, and white folks putting themselves back in control, Black people said, we need to meet. And in October, November, they met in Manchester. Who was the head of the Fifth Pan-African Conference? Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois.
Wow.
Still on the scene, still fighting. Who was the person who helped to run it? A young brother who went to America to become a priest, but met Pan-Africanism and African nationalism while in America. And so Kwame Nkrumah was the secretary running things. Who was the female representative to show the women's involvement in all this? Was Marcus Garvey's wife.
Oh, wow.
And so, but who was the one who who said we need to get this thing serious because we have to deal with the economics, politics, and culture of it all. And his name, he was from Trinidad, and his name was George Padmore. He had been in Europe and he was so successful and he was so brilliant that he was the most important black man in the Comintern. That's the Russian communist movement. He was an internationally recognized leader of the communist movement. But once he saw the transition going through communism, it looked like a movement to help people and poor people and the waves, the working class, etc. When he began to study this thing from the inside, he said, wait a minute, this Stalinism has now become a new form of white Russian nationalism. So he said, I'm out of here. And what he didn't just leave, he wrote a book. And the book was Pan Africanism or Communism by George Padmore. And so these brothers that met in that 1945 thing kicked off what I call a 50-year period of our consciousness. And that 50-year period, 1945 to 1995, all the things that we hold as significant and struggle comes out of that period. And so after the war, Africans went home and they said, we need to form our own nations. We need to break with colonialism. And so they began a movement to organize around their own interests. And so in 63, 40 of them met in Addis Ababa, and they said, we're going to form the Organization of African Unity. And who was the leader? Who welcomed them? Emperor Haile Selassie, who had resisted the Italians and got beat back because they didn't have the modern weaponry of the Italians in World War One, World War Two. But what had happened was in 1937 or thereabout, Haile Selassie saw the Italians trying to take his territory, and he appealed to the world to help because they were being under attack. And the world did not pay him any mind. And so Ethiopia stretched forth its hands unto the world for help, and they were rejected. And that set the stage for Hitler uh, running around the world and linking up with other fascists to produce that World War II. But after World War II, in spite of the deaths and whatnot, you got to build. And so Africans met and they decided they were going to try to move on the colonial systems and break it down and go for independence. So you have a whole series, 1945, you had the Pan-African Conference, but by 1946, you had Africans in Indonesia telling the Dutch, don't come back down here with your wood shoes and your windmills thinking you're going to colonize Indonesia. One of the richest parts of the planet is the islands of Indonesia. The Dutch had armed the Indonesians to fight the Japanese predators. And so they were prepared and they said, we will be able to take these arms that help to repel the Japanese to make sure you don't come back here with colonialism. In 1945, Black folks met Manchester to declare their independence and a new world vision for themselves. 1946, the hundreds of islands of Indonesia declared themselves independent with Sukarno, their leader. 1947, Gandhi had gone back to India and he was using an economic premise to strengthen the Indians. And he had told the Indians, weave your own cloth. And he wore a simple white cloth that he wove himself. And so by taking the economic dimension of struggle, he created a political dimension and then culturally a whole question of Hinduism being developed in a new way. So Gandhi, independence of India, 47. 48, you had the conflict in Palestine, Israel, and the Palestinian movement. 49, China, its independence. They had fought for years to try to get rid of feudalism and exploitation. And finally, in 49, in the 50s, you got a movement. 52, Gamal Nasser of Egypt, with his partner General Naguib. For the first time, black men ruled in Egypt in 1952 with the Egyptian uh, establishment of a new nation. 1953, you had Mossadegh and Iran, and they were trying to break off from control of the Europeans and establish an independence. 1954, you had Dien Bien Phu. That's when the Indonesians had fought the Japanese. They resisted others who tried the French coming back, and they resisted the French, and then the French got the help of the Americans. And so the Vietnamese were able, with their leader Ho Chi Minh, to establish their independence. And so this continues, and eventually 56, Sudan becomes independent. 57, Ghana becomes independent. 58, Guinea said, we don't want to be a part of the colonial system of France that de Gaulle had offered the French-speaking nations. And so de Gaulle said, if you want your freedom, we're going to strip everything out of Guinea, including the toilet paper, the telephones, the report cards. And they did, to bring the Guinea revolution to its knees. However, this brotherhood process has been so strong among our people that Nkrumah, the head of the 1957 independence of Ghana, Nkrumah was able to take the wealth of Ghana, which was in the land, it was in gold, it was in the land in terms of cocoa, it was in the land in terms of the trees of the forest. So, and Nkrumah had a surplus because of the Korean War. America needed what Ghana had, particularly chocolate, because all of these hundreds of thousands of soldiers had chocolate was one of the leading things. That was the dope of the time. And they probably put some little extra stuff in there to make that chocolate give the, so Ghana had a surplus in their budget, and they took $50 million of it in 1958 money, which is like $500 million today, and they gave it to Sekou Touré to save his revolution.
Wow. So, Dr. J, quick question.
1959, you got Castro in Cuba. 1960, you got the Black Brothers on our campuses starting a movement, etc. So you had 1962, you got the Caribbean nations becoming independent. 1962, 63, you got East Africa becoming independent. 1970s, you got the Portuguese nations fighting for independence. Angola, Mozambique. 1980, Rhodesia becomes Zimbabwe with the success of the Patriotic Front that was formed. And the last of the folks to come on board, of course, was Namibia in the 90s and South Africa. This struggle of our people to find their place in the sun has been real. It's been systemic. It continues. A luta continua. The struggle continues.
Wow. Wow. So, talking about struggle, in terms of, well, I guess what I want to know is when when you were asked to be part of the documentary, okay, and you obviously have a lot to offer, and a lot of knowledge. And for anyone who hasn't gotten their ticket, you need to go to happyfilm.com, get your ticket, because Dr. J is talking a lot about what he's talking about now is in the documentary. So in this case, if you didn't catch it all here, you could catch it in the Happy Film. But
it is one of the most important, significant filming operation in our history.
Yes. Yes.
And you have to and it was all done by our people, young people under me. That's a fantastic thing. It's marvelous to see Black men walking through Washington, D.C., claiming it and naming it. The Washington Monument, that's an African symbol. The temples, those are Africans. The layout of Washington, D.C. as a square, that's part of the ancient traditions of that. That's Brother Mfadishi walking through, laying this history out. And our sisters who had contributed to. That, look, in 1915, they came up with the Birth of the Nation movie, which was the Klansman book that was put on the magic of this filming, this new filming process. And it was considered such a great movie that President Wilson, they just took the name of his name off of the School of something, International Affairs at Princeton University, because Wilson was a racist. He was a racist who showed that film Birth of the Nation in the White House and said it was like writing history with lightning. It was writing the biggest lie in history with whiteness. And so that has been changed. And if that Birth of the Nation movie led to the Klan, the new Klan emerging, and led to the death of my grandfather, but he didn't die without leaving 13 of his children and his brothers and sisters and the people in that Georgia community. The schoolhouse that they built on the hill is still there. His tombstone, when I finally, after Alex Haley project, working with Alex Haley and getting disgusted with the white folks telling we bought, we need to, we're glad you're here, Dr. Jeffries, but we have to let you know we bought the rights to the book Roots. We're under no obligation to deal with the truth of the book. And certainly we don't have to deal with the truth of African history. I mean, I couldn't believe it. These were good white folks. Margolis, who was head of the whole project, Green, they brought in from England. I'm looking at not Ku Klux Klan white folks. I'm looking at decent white folks who have been a part of this phenomenon called Roots. But they did not hesitate to sit down, to have lunch with a brother who was there to help, who had gotten a $500,000 grant from the Carnegie Corporation to keep Alex's dream alive. They did not hesitate to sit down and execute a lynching, a removal in the lynching process that white folks loved was cutting off the testicles and the penis of the black man. That was the big thing. They had jars. People have in their house jars of the body parts of black people. That's the stories that we need to know about. And I felt that physically. They were there deballing me, a brother who had stood up for this history and had gone through Africa and all over, raising this history, was going to teach it through the New York school system. And then on this project that I had a major process of involvement, they're going to strip me and denude me. But there is a God, and she's African. Spirit told me to chill. And I said, chill after this that just happened, having lunch, and then I'm the one that's being eaten up. So I chilled. And then they had a Brunswick warehouse in Brunswick, Georgia, that they had a replica of the slave ship that was that brought Kunta Kinte across the United States. So I'm standing with Lou Gossett and other people that were part of the Roots filming. Mm-hmm. And this cutaway of a slave ship is so real that you're actually as if you're rocking in the slave ship, and you can see the decks. And up at the upper deck is the head of the youth. That was O.J. Simpleton. He was the head of the youth. And he's calling down 3 decks below him is somebody moaning and groaning, and that's Kunta Kinte. And so he's calling down to Kunta Kinte, eat, you have to be strong, because we may have to fight the white man and return to Mother Africa. Now, Lou Gossett, myself, and others, this was the heaviest scene that we've ever experienced. And on the actual set, and Green, who was in charge of the the African portion, Englishman, he ran out and threw something down on the ground and said, "We don't want return to Mother Africa in this scene." Well, that did it. That was it. There was no way I could stay. Spirit said, "You got to get your butt out of here." I called up to my Aunt Bessie. I said, "Aunt Bessie, where's my grandfather?" The Spirit said, "Go to see your grandfather's grave." My mother would never let us go to Georgia because she said, you Jersey boys would not know how to act in Georgia. I'll take you to Virginia. You could spend the summer there because that's my territory and I know that you'll be all right. But at any rate, I didn't know where my grandfather was. I called Aunt Bessie. I said, Aunt Bessie, where are we from? Where's your grandfather? She said, we're from Ohio. I said, Aunt Bessie, we're not from Ohio. We migrated out of Georgia into Ohio because Firestone and Goodyear were developing an industrial center there, and we were able to get the jobs because the cotton, the boll weevil, had destroyed the cotton crop for 3 years in a row in the 1915, 16, 17, 18. So one of our people had gone up from Georgia, and he saw what was happening, and he told them, come on up out of those cotton fields. So thousands of us, the Browners, the Maddocks, the Jeffries, all of us related down there in Georgia, they went up and had a chance to be a part of the economics of this new explosion that's going on in America. But what Aunt Bessie told me was, when I told her, I said, Aunt Bessie, we're not from Georgia. We migrated to Georgia, and we migrated out of Georgia to Ohio. So she got my drift. She said, your grandfather is buried in Midway Church Cemetery, Jasper County, Kelly, Georgia. And there it was. My truth had been given to me, and it was for me to run with it. And so for the first time, I left Alex Haley. I flew on a plane with Lauren Green. He was sitting next to me since everybody knew me. He was sipping mint juleps, talking about, isn't this wonderful? Roots, history, everybody's history. I wanted to throw the sucker out of the plane. It may be your history, but it's much more special to Black people than anything you can imagine. I got to Atlanta, and for the first time, I rented a car and went south into the heart of the pine fields of the Black Belt. And I actually found this little area where our families lived and had their farms, etc. I found the schoolhouse that was built on the hill. I found the church that, in fact, the church was open. I went in for the church and said my little prayers, and it was getting dark. And then I had to say, I said, your role is to come to go to your grandfather's grave. And here you are, and it's turning dark, and you by yourself. Now, can you imagine going south by myself, not knowing where the hell I was going?
No.
That spirit guided me.
Wow.
And so spirit had sense enough to say, turn on the lights of the car. So I turned the car around, pointed it toward the cemetery, turned on the lights of the car. And then being a city slicker, I had to get me a stick to take care of snakes.
Oh.
But of course, anybody in their right mind would know that you don't even have to worry about snakes. And a stick ain't going to do nothing with no snake. No. However, you need to worry about ticks, not snakes. But I ain't know nothing about no ticks. But I'm in the cemetery, and I meet my grandfather. Wow. Tallest tombstone in the cemetery, up to my chest. Just as that obelisk at the holy Mount Jebel Barkal was up to my chest. Yes! And so with this meeting of the grandfather, I looked at the tombstone, obelisk, and then there were pillars, twin pillars of masonry on the tombstone. Wow. I had just gone through all this pillar thing that I'm talking about with Dr. Ben and whatnot, and then with Taki, here's pillars. And then it had its vital statistics. Born August the 10th, 1868, and died July the 16th, 1917. Now, once I met the spirit of my grandfather alone in the woods, snakes and everything else. But once I got that power of the ancestors, I swore that I would use every ounce of what I have to fight this system of domination, destruction, and death, and make sure that this African truth becomes real. Yeah. And so I finally did make it out, and then I I've been, of course, everybody's been back. We've had family reunions there. And so the Birth of the Nation movie transformed and empowered Southerners to be building monuments to the Confederacy. This movie that Taki has taken the lead and the others with him, Happy, will have that same effect as a dynamic change of people's thinking. It will have more of an effect than we realize. Whatever we do for our people here in America, we do. But it will have an effect in the Caribbean that cannot even be anticipated now. The University of the West Indies and these other schools will take it and run with it. It'll have an effect in North South America because you have those three African nations, the Guyanas, British Guyana, French Guyana, and Dutch Guyana. And one of the great leaders of the Guyana was Ross McConnell. He was one of the leaders of the Fifth Pan-African Conference. In fact, he had restaurants, and he was able to feed these Africans in England trying to make their way. They knew they would not starve because Ross McConnell would have a meal ready for them. Ross McConnell was one of the leaders of British Guyana. And then we will go into the heart of South America, which is Brazil, and take that film to our brothers and sisters in Brazil, the largest Black community in the Western Hemisphere.
Yes.
And it's a catalyst of traditions of different African groups and it produced candomblé and all of the traditions out of Brazil. In fact, when I went to the mountains to meet the spirit of Zumbi, which I did, and again, that was a life-changing experience, that the people, I got off the bus because I said, you fly from Rio or Sao Paulo up to Maceió in the northeast, and then up above Recife. And then you go from the train into the foot of the mountains. And when you get to the foot of the mountains on the train, you take a bus and you go up to the top of the hill and the top of the mountains. And that's where Zumbi of Palmares set up African warriors who fought for almost 100 years to keep Black folks free in Brazil. And I have the pictures of my up in the mountain. I got off halfway up the mountain. I said, this bus ain't going to make it, and I ain't going to die on no bus crash. So when I got off, half the people got off with me, and they walked up with me. It took us another 2 hours to get up there. By the time we got there, the ceremony honoring Zumbi was over.
Wow.
And the Babalao and the priestess, this dozen Black women, blacker than the ace of spades, met. They put their heads together, and the priestess went to the priest, and they said, the spirit of Zumbi has returned. And they ceremony on the top of the mountain, and they gave me the Ogun beads, the god of war in the Yoruba tradition. And those beads were so powerful for me spiritually that when I had my legal case in the New York Supreme Court, when the state attorneys and the district office and all those people came to question me, I went into the bathroom and took a wee-wee. But more important, I took out the Ogun beads and draped myself with them. I had the Akan tradition of our brother, the drummer, and I had brother Taiwo, Akan priest, a Yoruba priest, who gave me a ring. I had these rings, these 7 rings that the priestess who protects the golden stool of the Ashanti gave me these rings when my wife and I and our group went to visit her. So much spiritual protection has been put around this move to bring out the truth that there's no way it can be stopped. There's no breaking into some stores, stealing some Gucci's, gonna block it. There's no way of pulling down some statues and not even understand who the damn statue was. Some of these statues you need to leave up there. You need to leave Jefferson up there to point out the contradictions. This nation was not found on freedom, justice, and equality. It was found on rich white men with property and power. Even poor whites didn't have any votes in Jefferson's book.
Yeah.
It's the tradition that they got from feudalism in Europe, where even the manor, the young white man working like a dog, trying to make a way and survive on the manor, and then he falls in love with a maiden at the other end of the manor. But the way the European system worked of feudalism was that the lord of the manor had the right of first night. And so before the young fellow could marry his maiden, she had to be in bed with the lord of the manor. That's the European value system. Degrading people.
Yeah.
And control having these lords. Well, Jefferson was a lord. He lived in a manor. He had 4 plantations. Washington was a lord. And all of the founding fathers were slave master bastards. So why are we going to pick out 1 or 2? Leave them all there and see that a contradiction. Jefferson could not do what he needed to do by himself on Monticello or the 3 other plantations. Black folk, the rejected stone, were the cornerstone that keep America's economy alive.
Yep.
Black folks ran the plantations. They prepared the meals. They did the healing. And black breasts nourished these children.
Yeah.
We got to know what the history is. Just striking a blow does not do anything. You got to have a plan. We need to know each of the slave owners and how many Africans they had enslaved at the time of the signing of the Declaration. America is a contradiction, just like European history is a contradiction, just like British history is a contradiction, just like French history, just like German history, Hitler and the rest. We need to show that Africans come out of another cut of cloth, royal cloth.
Mm-hmm.
And so hopefully, if I, survive the virus,
You will, Dr.
I'll
J.
be able to make a contribution. But if I don't, what has already been done, I am assured, and I will be assuring Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben and Glory and Dr. Chancellor Williams and Professor Jackson and Glory that our future in terms of our history is in solid African hands.
Yes.
And
yes.
it will make its mark. They'll be able to rewrite the history books using it as and these are young people who prepared this, and they're taking on the history of the world and making it correct and setting it up right. So look, I'm just, I'm telling Nkrumah, relax. They got it together. And Nelson, because this was the book I did on the struggle in South Africa. But the hero was Nelson Mandela in nominal symbolic terms. He was a leader of the ANC, and he was a lawyer, but then he got arrested, and then he went to jail. He was in jail for 25, 27 years. So he is a symbol of the struggle in South Africa. But the reality, the rejected stone in South Africa that became the cornerstone for their revolution was young men like Stephen Biko, who I talk about in this. Stephen Biko, a young man who, inspired by Malcolm X and our struggles in the United States, started the movement of the students. And it was the students, the babies, who defied the South African guns. And there's pictures of young Preston holding even younger brother, running from the bullets of the South African. Once the children were sacrificed, the South African struggle exploded. And it wasn't Nelson because he was in jail. It wasn't Oliver Tambo and the ANC because they were in exile. I was meeting with some of them in Geneva. Madam Tambo, she was still in the country. We set up a sewing circle for her in South Africa, and that sewing circle was political education. The key to South Africa were the children and the women. So Winnie Mandela, no matter what problems may have occurred, she held up that women's component of the struggle, and we have to respect her for that. Roz and I have a beautiful picture of Winnie Mandela coming back and forth to the United States, meeting with us and encouraging us as we encouraged her.
Mm.
And she is holding on. Rosin is on one side and I'm on the other. She is holding us like it's for dear life. Winnie is there. So it was the women. The women refused to be moved. They had the black dot. I talk about it in this book that I wrote. They have, when they decided to remove a black community, they called it a black dot. And they were moving black people out of key areas around the cities and moving them out into townships and to Bantustan. But these women refused when they got the word that the bulldozers were coming to tear down their squatted towns. They were the black men who were under pressure from the South Africans got the word to the women that they're coming for this spot. So before they got there, the women had gotten the sticks holding up their tarpaulins and whatnot, and had gotten keeping. They had them all rolled up, and they disappeared in the woods. And then when they came to remove it, there was nothing to remove. They was gone. So they did something with the land. And by the time they got out of there, the women came back out of the woods and put the shanty towns up again. The struggle of women refusing to accept their condition. That's the spirit of South Africa. It's not in anybody meeting with the white folks and signing some papers and whatnot and saying that we got it. So that's what we've got to bring up. That's what this happy film process will create a movement throughout Africa, throughout the Africans in Europe. I mean, there's some in Europe. I just showed my wife a book by a brother who's an Ebony editor. He worked with Ebony before it went out of business. Hans Massaquoi, and he was raised in Germany, a mixed German mother and an African American, African father, Liberian father, and so he was able to tell his story. And again, our story needs to be told. It will be retold over and over again with this happy formula. This is not people trying to get an Oscar, people trying to get some gold medal and some honor from white folks. But this film, like no other film, will be able to shake our world and have us stand up and reclaim it.
Yes.
In
And
the 70s, they had the black films. And Camille Yarbrough, a sister we brought on at City College, she was a part of the black films. They had Shaft and all of that stuff and the music. We still hop into the music. But that was Hollywood. White folks controlling Hollywood, controlling the images and controlling that. And when they decided to move away from that, they moved away from that. Then they created something when we had the rap music and whatnot. Then they come in and take over that. They ain't gonna take over this story.
no, no.
About this is a story forever. This is a change of the consciousness of the
Yes.
world.
Happy,
And
happy.
I'm glad
Yes.
to be happy in this happiness. And
Yes.
so, brothers and sisters, uh, the symbol of what we've been talking about uh, is going to be raised. We're going to be talking about the symbol of Washington Monument, African, the pyramids, African, the temples, African, even an understanding of the economic, studying the movement of the heavenly bodies so you can predict when the rains were going to come. Even studying the formation and the relationship of the heavenly bodies to know when the rains are going to cease and you can now plant your crop. Even studying when the crops are ready. In other words, it's an attempt for us to read the universe. And so we are the rejected stone that is the keystone for building.
Mhm.
Jeff.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I got rejected, I bounced back. So I've been the rejected stone, but that ain't stopped my black ass. I'm still going forth with black
Yes.
power.
You are going strong, Dr. J. And
But
thank you.
we had a chance to be at the right place at the right time. This is my wife and I, and that's us in Senegal. And there is the future. This
Yes.
monument the monument of the Renaissance, the rebirth. And that's what happy is about. It's not, that's right, sister. Look, oh, yes. Oh, look at that vagina that's up there in the corner. That shot is fantastic historically. You got the black man pointing to the future. He's
Yeah.
got his child pointing to the future.
Yeah.
Then over to the corner, you have the goddess Nut, who the Africans reading the stars. She, the female power of the divine. The goddess Nut swallows the sun when it sets and it passes through her body during the night. And she gives birth. Look at that vagina. She gives birth to the sun in the morning. And then there is that movement up that represents. That's the black man holding up his preciousness, the black child, and holding on to his foundation, the black woman. And that is the largest statue of its kind. It's on a quiet volcano, an inactive volcano. And the black man is not on his knees praying, not on his knees shooting crap, not on his knees playing soccer. The black man is rising. And it's not then I rise, it is we rise as African global people and our cousins, the 2 or 3 billion people that can relate to us.
Mhm.
And the man is holding on to his rock and holding not the torch that they have in the Statue of Liberty. And they had a beautiful thing on it last night. It was the best that I've seen. They even mentioned the African component that helped inspire it. But the child is being held up. The child is not playing with the father. The child is pointing to the future.
Yes.
It's not a Kunta Kinte thing where you're holding up the child and you're whispering his name in his ear and then holding up to the universe. But it's similar. But the child is being held up by the father. And the child is not pointing north to Europe where we usually look for sustenance. He's not pointing east to Mecca. He's not pointing south east to African nations. He's pointing across the ocean to the New World Africans in the Western Hemisphere. And it is the link between the New World Africans and Africans on the continent and Africans out of the continent that will carve out a new plan for the future. So we're going to follow Amos Wilson when he produced the blueprint for Black Power. And then off of this film, we're going to produce the African, Pan-African blueprint for African empowerment.
Yes.
Each of us going to take a piece of it and work it.
Oh.
No, this is so fantastic. I mean, I look, under normal circumstances, you might say you're so happy, you ready to pee in your pants, but I ain't gonna give you all the satisfaction of thinking that Dr. J has some ordinary circumstances around here. No, I'm talking about extraordinary circumstances. Unbeknownst to me, spirit has moved in my world and the people that are with me, like Dr. John Henry Clark, coming up from the bowels of the South, the cotton picking South. And that cotton picking South was real because when tobacco did not sell and Jefferson and Washington couldn't get money out of tobacco to sustain their plantations, then in 1794, I believe it was, 1794, Eli Whitney discovered the cotton gin. And then cotton became a potential economic wealth. And so into the 1800s, even after the slave trade itself was stopped in 1807, 1808, and we have it in documents, but a new economic endeavor came up, and that was cotton. But in order for cotton to have rich soil, the black land, not of the Nile, but the black land of the Mississippi and the lands of the South, in order for that black land to be utilized, these pine trees, these millions of pine trees, had to be uprooted. And the rejected stone, black men who were rejected as not being men, were called upon to use their physical prowess to uproot millions of pine trees so that that black soil could be utilized. And that meant that the black men cutting the trees meant that their women followed them with machetes to cut the root out so that that black soil could be used for cotton. And it ran from Georgia to Alabama to Mississippi on to Louisiana and into Texas. That's the history that we got to tell from our perspective without holding back. And
Yeah.
so that's what I think I'm sure we're going to be able to do. Because if y'all don't do it, and I already going up to the great beyond, I'm going to be talking to my elders who say, well, look, let them do what they're going to do. I said, no, they need some direction from on high.
Yeah.
They got the white, blonde, blue-eyed Jesus telling them what to do. They got the Arab telling them what to do. They need to hear from y'all. So when I get up there, I'm going to be organizing them up into some
I know
heavy
you are.
black power. So some shit is going to come down, raining down on you, and boom! And we're going to make another move. The, the, the rejected stone, that's in masonry. And
Yeah.
that's in the building of the pyramids. That's in the, so ain't no need for us to apologize. We just need to go ahead.
Yeah.
We got to work with white folks. We share the planet with them. We have to work with these Arabs. We share traditions with them. We have to deal with these Chinese and tell them we're going to be ready to deal with y'all. Y'all think you're going to take Africa? No. That happy film is going to say, no, this sacred land is ours.
And you know what, Dr. J, on that note, we're going to leave everybody with that last statement you made. Happy, 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 happy. Yes. So everybody, thank you, Dr. J. I mean, thank you for everything. Our conversation is going to be, one for the history books right here. Thank you for all your knowledge and your love for us. Like, really, thank you. Make sure everybody go to happyfilm.com.
Hey.
Get your tickets. Happyfilm.com. It's next Saturday, July 18th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Right after, following the premiere, we're going to have a special panel discussion. So if you got a ticket, you automatically get a ticket and a link to see, to be part of the panel discussion and to see, what that's going to be about. It's going to be wonderful. We'll have Dr. J and some other cast members there.
And then we're going to let the world know that Taki has been moving in a heavy spiritual realm.
Yeah.
And one of the spirits moving him is the spirit of Tahaka, coming out of the ancients of the Nile. So there, when you see this dude and you see this image, say, don't that look a little bit like Taki? And those of us who know Taki, he got Taki's experience and spirit and working with it. Hey, we're on our path, and as Dr. Clark and others would say, and his great work is Africans at the Crossroads, Notes for an African World Revolution. And so next time we get a chance to talk, we'll dissect Dr. Clark's life from beginning to end. Born in the rural South Alabama, Union Springs, family moved a few miles into Georgia. But he said that he had the deities in his life. He had 3 deities in his life, and they were 3 women. His grandma, his mother, his 5th grade school teacher, Eveline Taylor. Those women saw the potential in him, genius in him, and they worked it. My mother saw the genius in myself and my brothers, and it was worked. And so not only do you have a Dr. Jeffries and his partner, Dr. Ralston Jeffries, but you cannot see me without my brother next to me in every dimension. He's with me right now. And his great, beautiful wife, Rosie, and they produced these 2 beautiful children, these man-child, Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries, the younger, and attorney, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. And they have been blessed with the Nile experience. They were in the great temple with grandma and auntie and uncle, with 1,000 of us in the great temple of Karnak and the Nile Valley. 1,000 of us going through the countryside, going down to the great building of Ramses II and whatnot. Oh, goodness.
Yes, Dr. J, that's a good story. That's a good. You got to save that story though. That's a good one because that's when you have that story with your brother
I'm trying to give you
James Small.
I'm trying to give you your full because by the time Rouse and I send our bill to you, you're going to say, oh, no wonder he couldn't stop. He done billed me for a couple of $1,000. Brother Smalls is a special spirit moving among us. He was asked to be a partner in an unusual way with Malcolm, and he was, and Malcolm's family, and Sister Betty, Malcolm's widow, and Malcolm's elder sister Ella. He moved in to be a partner with me and the others putting together the Black Studies Department, and he brought a special spirit there. He's got into all of these African religious traditions. He synthesized them. So he doesn't represent just somebody looking for something and finding it. He's created a synthesis of African spirituality. And then he's had nerve enough to have a lovely wife who is a medical doctor, taking care of business. And then they have their children. And then their children have children. So he's got more than a dozen youngers that he has to deal with. But they got the spirit moving with them.
Yeah.
Brother Small's mother was really his grandmother. The mother and grandmother worked the mojo on him. So he has this special appreciation of the role of the Black woman. But he knows about brotherhood. His brother up in the mountains in California, and he brotherhood with me and the others. He has this unusual understanding of brotherhood, sisterhood, family, spirituality. Yeah. So we need to say, Black power!
Black power.
African power!
African power.
Pan-Africanism.
Pan-Africanism, yes. All right, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. We want to give all our shout outs to the Happy team. All of, this is going to be really exciting next week because we have a bunch of different like media entities that have actually been interviewing a lot of our cast members for the last 2 weeks. So I want to give a special shout out to the African History Network, King Simon Show, Carl Nelson Show, Asar Imhotep Show, and he's also in the film, Sonetta Studios, Shrine of Mayat, and the Philippe Matthews Show. That he's the Oprah of media. So I want to thank all of you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you, Dr. J. Black Power Fist. Peace.
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 And power.
And power.